These are the 7 levels of NFL playoff chokers. We're basing it off how they performed when it mattered the most. Level 1 are super clutch players, all the way to level 7, which are stuff of nightmares. The criteria is simple: how you showed up in elimination games and whether you elevated or disappeared under pressure. Let's get into it.
Level 1, Super Clutch.
This is the gold standard. These 4 quarterbacks didn't just win championships, they dominated the biggest moments in NFL history. Tom Brady sits at the top. 7 Super Bowl rings, 5 Super Bowl MVPs. The guy has 13 fourth quarter comebacks in the playoffs, which is an NFL record. Brady's playoff resume includes the greatest upset in Super Bowl history at that time against the Rams, the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, down 28-3 against Atlanta in the Super Bowl, where he led the Patriots to 31 unanswered points and won in OT. His passer rating is 95.3 in the playoffs, which is higher than most quarterbacks' regular season numbers. Brady threw 88 touchdowns in the playoffs, which is 40 interceptions. The man was built for January football. Patrick Mahomes is a modern-day version of Brady, and he might end up surpassing him one day. Mahomes already had 3 Super Bowl rings before turning 30. His playoff stats are absolutely absurd: 5,424 passing yards, 45 touchdowns, and just 11 interceptions through 20 playoff games. That's a 105.4 passer rating in the postseason. Mahomes has led 9 fourth quarter comebacks in playoff games, including the 2022 AFC Championship game when Kansas City trailed Cincinnati at halftime and won 23-20. He's won 3 Super Bowls like we mentioned before, and in those 3 games, he was down 10 plus points in each. Mahomes doesn't choke, he elevates. Joe Montana never lost a Super Bowl, 4 rings and 3 Super Bowl MVPs. Montana's playoff passer rating was 95.6, and he threw 45 touchdowns against just 21 interceptions in 23 playoff games. Montana's most iconic moment came in the Super Bowl against the Cincinnati Bengals, when he led a 92-yard game-winning drive against Cincinnati with 3:20 left on the clock, capping it with a touchdown pass to John Taylor with 34 seconds left. Cool under pressure doesn't begin to describe Joe Montana. John Elway dragged mediocre Bronco teams to 3 Super Bowls in the 80s before finally winning back-to-back titles in 97 and 98. Elway's playoff record was 14-8, and he led 6 fourth quarter comebacks in postseason games. His signature moment came in the 1986 AFC Championship game where he orchestrated the drive, 98 yards and 15 plays to tie the game against Cleveland, then won it in OT. Elway threw for 4,964 yards and 27 touchdowns in the playoffs with a passer rating of 79.7, which doesn't sound that elite looking at modern standards, but he played in an era where defenses could mug receivers. Elway's ability to will his team to victory in hostile environments separates him from everyone else. These 4 quarterbacks share one trait: they got better when the stakes got higher. Level 2 are still clutch players, just not as clutch, and as we continue, the players will increase in their playoff choking ability.
Level 2, Clutch.
Level 2 is for players who won championships and made big plays, but their overall player performance doesn't match the all-time greats. Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls, both against Tom Brady and the Patriots. Those victories cemented his legacy. Manning finished his career with an 8-4 playoff record, which was solid. He threw 17 touchdowns and 9 interceptions in 12 playoff games with a passer rating of 87.4. That's respectable, just not elite. In the Super Bowl in 2007, he made this helmet catch happen and led the game-winning drive. In the Super Bowl in 2011, he threw the go-ahead touchdown pass to Ahmad Bradshaw with 57 seconds left. However, Manning went one and done in the playoffs multiple times. The highs were incredible, but the lows were not so great. Terry Bradshaw won 4 Super Bowls with the Steelers in the 1970s, which is an incredible achievement. However, his playoff stats don't hold up to modern scrutiny. Bradshaw threw 30 touchdowns and 26 interceptions in 19 playoff games with a passer rating of 83. Bradshaw had the benefit of playing on one of the greatest teams ever assembled. The Steel Curtain defense carried Pittsburgh in several playoff runs. His best playoff performance came in the Super Bowl when he threw 4 touchdowns against Dallas, but he also threw 1 interception and 0 touchdowns and completed only 40% of his passes in the 1976 divisional loss to Oakland. Bradshaw was clutch in moments, but he wasn't the reason Pittsburgh dominated the entire decade. Adam Vinatieri is the most clutch kicker in NFL history, but even he had his failures. Vinatieri made 2 game-winning field goals in Super Bowls, a 48-yarder to beat the Rams and a 41-yarder to beat the Carolina Panthers. He also kicked the game-tying field goal in 2001 divisional round against Oakland in the snow. Vinatieri's playoff field goal percent is 84.4, which is excellent. However, he missed crucial kicks too. In the 2005 divisional game, Vinatieri missed a 40-plus yard field goal that could have gotten the Pats back in it. The Pats lost and wouldn't go on to three-peat. He was crazy clutch, but again, just a notch below. Finally, we have Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice is the greatest wide receiver in NFL history, but his playoff performances weren't always dominant. Rice caught 151 passes for 2,245 yards and 22 touchdowns in 29 playoff games, which are phenomenal numbers. However, Rice had some quiet games and big moments. In the Super Bowl where he won Super Bowl MVP, he caught 11 passes for 215 yards and a touchdown. But in the 1990 NFC Championship game lost to the Giants, Rice had just 5 catches for 51 yards. In the 1998 wild card win against the Green Bay Packers, Rice fumbled even though the rest didn't call it on the eventual game-winning drive. Rice was incredible, but he had moments where he's just a step below. Now in level 3, these folks are borderline chokers.
Level 3. Borderline chokers.
Level 3 is where things get controversial. These players won championships or put up incredible numbers, but they had significant playoff failures that kept them from being truly clutch. Russell Wilson won a Super Bowl and appeared in back-to-back championship games with Seattle, but his decision-making in critical moments has been questionable. Wilson's playoff record is 9-7, and he threw 23 touchdowns against 13 interceptions in 16 playoff games with a passer rating of 95.6. Those are definitely solid numbers. However, Wilson's Super Bowl interception at the goal line is one of the most infamous plays in NFL history. Instead of heading it off to Marshawn Lynch, Wilson threw a slant that Malcolm Butler intercepted. That single play defines Wilson's playoff legacy more than his Super Bowl victory. Wilson also threw 4 interceptions in the 2014 Conference Championship against Green Bay. He would then throw the game-winning touchdown in OT. He also threw 2 interceptions in the 2016 divisional loss to Atlanta, having a history of some truly awful performances, but also making some really big plays. The highs were high, but the lows were catastrophic. Aaron Rodgers is the most talented QB of his generation, but his playoff resume is disappointing. Rodgers finished his career with a 12-10 playoff record and just 1 Super Bowl ring. His playoff passer rating is 100.1 with 45 touchdowns and 13 interceptions in 21 games. His playoff passer rating is 100.1 with 45 touchdowns and 13 interceptions in 22 games, which is elite on paper. The problem is Rodgers disappeared in too many NFC Championship games. In the 2014 NFC Championship game against Seattle, Rodgers and the Packers blew a 16-0 halftime lead and lost in OT. Though that was mostly the team blowing and not him. In the 2019 NFC Championship game against San Francisco, Rodgers threw for 225 yards with 0 TDs and 2 interceptions in a 37-20 blowout loss. In the 2020 NFC Championship game against Tampa, head coach Matt LaFleur chose to kick a field goal on the 4th and goal from the 8-yard line instead of letting Rodgers actually cook. So it wasn't all his fault. Rodgers had the talent to win multiple championships, but he didn't typically deliver when it mattered the most, even though a decent amount of that was also his team's fault. Same will go with Dan Marino. Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl despite being one of the most prolific passers in NFL history. Marino's playoff record was 8-10, and he threw 32 touchdowns against 24 interceptions in 18 playoff games with a passer rating of 77.1. That's below his regular season passer rating of 86.4. Marino's only Super Bowl appearance came in 1984 when the Dolphins lost to San Francisco 38-16. He never made it back. Marino had multiple one-and-done playoff exits, including losses to Cleveland in 1985 and Jacksonville in 99. Mixed in there was his poor performance in the 1992 AFC Championship game as well against the Bills with 1 touchdown and 2 INTs. The lack of championship keeps Marino from being considered super clutch, but he also wasn't a playoff disaster. Drew Brees won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans in 2009. He finished with a career 9-9 playoff record and threw 37 touchdowns against 22 interceptions in those 18 playoff games, with a passer rating of 94.6. Brees had some excellent playoff performances, including 8 touchdowns to 0 interceptions during that 2009 championship playoff run. However, Brees also had brutal losses, including in the 2011 divisional round against San Francisco, in the 2017 divisional round against Minnesota, in the 2018 NFC Championship game against the Rams. Brees did get screwed in the 2018 loss to the Rams on a non-call. However, they did get the ball first in OT and didn't score, eventually losing in overtime. Randy Moss is one of the greatest wide receivers ever, but his player performances were inconsistent. Moss caught 47 passes for 675 yards and 7 TDs in 13 playoff games, which are good numbers but not dominant. In the Super Bowl in 2007, Moss had 5 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown, but he disappeared in the second half as the Giants upset the Patriots. In the 1998 NFC Championship game, Moss had 6 catches for 75 yards as Minnesota lost to Atlanta. Moss had big moments, but he didn't take over playoff games the way Jerry Rice did. Brett Favre won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay in 1996, but his playoff legacy is defined by interceptions. Favre threw 44 touchdowns and 30 interceptions in 24 playoff games with an 86.3 passer rating. But he threw multiple game-ending interceptions in multiple playoff losses. In the 2007 NFC Championship game against the Giants, Favre threw an interception in OT that ended Green Bay's season. In the 2009 NFC Championship game with Minnesota, Favre threw an interception across his body that set up New Orleans' game-winning field goal. Favre was a gunslinger, and that mentality cost him in big moments. Next up in level 4, we get to actual chokers.
Level 4. Chokers.
Level 4 is where we find players who had talent and opportunities but consistently failed in playoff moments. These aren't bad players, they were good enough to get their teams to the postseason, but when the lights got bright, they disappeared. Andy Dalton went 0-4 in playoff games with Cincinnati, and his performances in those losses were brutal. Dalton threw 1 touchdown against 6 interceptions in those 4 games, with a passer rating of 57.8. In the 2015 wildcard game against Pittsburgh, Dalton's backup, A.J. McCarron, nearly pulled off the upset before a penalty cost Cincinnati that game. The fact A.J. McCarron almost won a playoff game Dalton never could speaks volumes. Dalton's worst game came in his first playoff game. He threw for 257 yards but had 0 TDs and 3 interceptions. The Bengals had a talented roster during Dalton's tenure, but he couldn't get them over the hump. Jay Cutler finished his career 1-1 in the playoffs, but the reason he was looked at as a choker is for one reason. In the 2010 NFC Championship game, Cutler left the game with a knee injury while trailing. The optics were terrible. Cutler standing on the sideline while backup Caleb Haney tried to mount a comeback. Chicago lost 21-14, and Cutler's toughness was questioned for years afterward. Kirk Cousins has a 1-4 playoff record with 2 different teams. His lone playoff victory came in the 2019 wildcard round when Minnesota upset New Orleans on the road. Cousins threw for 242 yards and 1 touchdown in that game, which was by far his best performance. However, Cousins hasn't been very good in his other playoff appearances. In the 2015 wildcard loss to Green Bay, Cousins threw for 329 yards but had no touchdowns. They were mostly empty calorie stats in a 35-18 defeat. In the 2022 wildcard loss to the Giants, Cousins threw for 273 yards and 2 TDs and a 31-24 loss to Daniel Jones. He would throw a check down on a final play, which would ultimately show us exactly who he was. Tony Romo went 2-4 in playoff games with Dallas and never advanced past the divisional round. Romo's playoff stats were decent enough, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 93 passer rating in 6 games, but his failures came at the worst possible moments. In the 2006 wildcard game against Seattle, Romo famously botched the hold on a game-winning field goal attempt, and Dallas would ultimately lose. In the 2007 divisional round against the Giants, Romo threw for 201 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception in a 21-17 loss. Romo's playoff failures became a defining part of his legacy, and he never escaped that choker label despite being a talented QB. Dak Prescott has a 2-5 record in the playoffs with Dallas and hasn't advanced past the divisional round either. Prescott's playoff performances have been wildly inconsistent. In the 2021 wildcard loss to San Francisco, Prescott threw for 254 yards and 1 touchdown, but also had an interception and a dumb QB slide as time expired at the end of the game. In the 2022 divisional round loss to San Francisco, Prescott threw 206 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions in a 19-12 defeat. And in the 2023 wildcard blowout loss to Green Bay, Prescott threw 2 interceptions, one of those being a pick 6, in a 48-32 defeat. He obviously hasn't been the worst QB we've ever seen, but he hasn't been good enough for a QB making $60 million per year either. Mike Vanderjagt was one of the most accurate kickers in NFL history during the regular season, but he missed crucial kicks in the playoffs. In the 2005 divisional round against Pittsburgh, Vanderjagt missed a 40-plus yard field goal. He would make 87.5% of his kicks during the regular season, but just 66.7% in the playoffs. Just an incredible drop-off. And lastly, we have Donovan McNabb. McNabb had a 9-7 playoff record with Philadelphia, but never won a Super Bowl. He threw 24 touchdowns and 17 interceptions in 16 playoff games with a pass rating of 86.4. Finishing much like Brett Favre in a lot of those playoff games with interceptions. His worst moment came in the Super Bowl when he threw for 357 yards and 3 TDs, but he also had 3 interceptions in a 24-21 loss to New England. McNabb also infamously threw up in the huddle during the final drive of that game, which became a lasting image of his playoff struggles. He had the talent, but he couldn't finish when it mattered the most. Level 5, we get to some extreme chokers.
Level 5. Extreme chokers.
Level 5 is reserved for players with a pattern of failures that overshadowed their otherwise solid careers. Mark Andrews in 2019 dropped multiple passes against the Titans. His playoff struggles would creep back up in 2024 against the Bills. Getting the ball punched when the Ravens were trying to mount a comeback and losing that fumble. Then dropping a potential 2-point conversion during the final minutes of that game. The Ravens would go on to lose. Andrews has caught 29 passes for 315 yards in 8 playoff games with 0 touchdowns. The Ravens were 1 conversion away from tying the game and potentially winning, but Andrews couldn't make the catch. Nate Kading was one of the most accurate kickers in NFL history during the regular season, making 86% of his field goals. However, his playoff performances were disastrous. In 8 playoff games with San Diego, Kading made just 8 of 15 field goal attempts. In the 2004 wild card loss to the Jets, Kading missed a 40-yard field goal. In the 2009 divisional loss to the Jets, Kading missed 3 field goals, including a 36-yarder and a 57-yarder. Kading's playoff field goal percentage was just 53%, which is backup level production from a guy who made 2 Pro Bowls. The Chargers lost all 3 of those games he missed field goals, and Kading's misses were the difference. Wes Welker had one of the most infamous drops in NFL playoff history. In the Super Bowl, the Patriots led the Giants 17-15 in the fourth quarter when Tom Brady threw a deep ball to Wes Welker on 2nd and 11. The ball hit Welker's hands, but he couldn't hang on. If Welker catches that pass, the Patriots likely run out the clock and win their 4th Super Bowl in 6 years. The Giants won 21-17, and Welker's drop became a defining moment of his career. Welker caught 88 passes for 866 yards and 5 TDs in 13 playoff games, which are solid numbers. That one drop is the biggest moment overshadowed everything else, along with his consistent drop-off from greatness in the regular season to pedestrian in the postseason. TJ Watt is one of the best defensive players in the NFL, but his playoff performances haven't matched his regular season dominance. Watt has 1 sack in 4 playoff games, which is a significant drop-off from his regular season production. In the 2021 wildcard game against Kansas City, Watt had 3 tackles and 1 sack as the Steelers lost 42-21. Watt has been a defensive player of the year, but he hasn't made game-changing plays in the postseason. The Steelers are 0-4 in his playoff games during Watt's career, and his inability to take over games when it matters the most is a problem. Adrian Peterson rushed for 412 yards and just 5 TDs in 5 playoff games with Minnesota, which is underwhelming for a running back who rushed for over 14,000 yards in his career. Peterson's worst playoff performance came in that 2009 NFC Championship game when he fumbled 2 times against New Orleans, losing one of them. The Vikings lost 31-28, and Peterson's turnover was a major reason why. Peterson also had just 99 yards in the 2012 wildcard loss to Green Bay and 45 yards on 18 carries in the 2015 wildcard loss to Seattle. Peterson is a Hall of Famer, but he disappeared in the playoffs for sure. Still, these guys weren't next-level historical chokers like Level 6.
Level 6, historical chokers.
Level 6 is for players whose playoff failures are so significant that they become a part of NFL history. Starting with Lamar Jackson. Lamar has a 3-5 playoff record. Despite winning 2 MVP awards, his playoff performances have been consistently underwhelming compared to his regular season dominance. Jackson has thrown 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions in 8 playoff games with an 84.6 passer rating. That's a massive drop-off from his regular season passer rating of 102.2. Jackson's worst moment came in the 2019 divisional round when the top-seeded Ravens, off the back of his MVP, went 14-2 in the regular season. He lost at home to the 6th-seeded Tennessee Titans 28-12. In the 2023 AFC Championship game, Jackson threw for 272 yards and a touchdown, but also had an interception and couldn't lead a game-tying drive in the final minutes. Jackson's 3-5 playoff record with 2 MVP awards is one of the worst disparities between regular season success and postseason failure in the modern NFL. Matt Ryan's playoff legacy is defined by one game, 28-3. Matt Ryan was on pace to win Super Bowl MVP in that game as well, and then everything fell apart. Atlanta scored 0 points in the fourth quarter in overtime, while New England scored 31 straight. Ryan threw for 284 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game, but he also took a crucial sack that knocked him out of field goal range late. Ryan finished his career with a 4-6 playoff record and threw 20 touchdowns against 7 interceptions in 10 playoff games. Ryan was a talented quarterback. The 28-3 collapse will forever define his career. Fran Tarkenton went to 3 Super Bowls with Minnesota in the 1970s and lost all 3. The Vikings were demolished 24-7 by Miami in that first Super Bowl, then 16-6 by Pittsburgh in the second, and then 32-14 by Oakland in the third. Tarkenton threw just 1 touchdown and 6 interceptions in those 3 games combined with a passer rating of 43.7. He finished his career with a 6-5 playoff record and threw 11 touchdowns against 17 interceptions in 15 playoff games with a passer rating of 58.6. The Vikings' inability to win a Super Bowl with Fran at quarterback became a defining part of the franchise's history and playoff failures, which is something we'll get to pretty soon. Marvin Harrison is one of the greatest receivers in NFL history, but his playoff performances were inconsistent. Harrison caught just 65 passes for 883 yards and 2 touchdowns in his lengthy career. Marvin Harrison has just 1 more receiving touchdown in a playoff game than Marcus Mariota. In the Super Bowl that they won, Harrison had 5 catches for 59 yards and a touchdown in the victory. However, Harrison had multiple quiet playoff games. In the 2005 divisional round loss to Pittsburgh, Harrison had just 3 catches for 52 yards. In the 2007 divisional round loss to San Diego, he had 2 catches for 27 yards. Harrison was great during the regular season, but he didn't take over playoff games the way other elite receivers did. These guys were historic chokers, just not the biggest chokers of all time like we have next.
Level 7, the biggest chokers.
Level 7 is reserved for the absolute worst playoff performers in NFL history. These aren't just individual failures. These are systemic collapses that span decades or careers defined by coming up short in the biggest moments. To start, we have the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings have the worst playoff history of any NFL franchise. 4 Super Bowl appearances in the 1970s without winning a single championship game. The 1998 season ended with Gary Anderson missing his first field goal of the year in the NFC Championship. The 2009 season ended with Brett Favre's interception in the NFC Championship game against New Orleans. The 2022 wildcard game against the Giants when Minnesota went 13-4 and lost at home to a 6 seed. Getting absolutely worked by the Rams in 2024, 27-9. The Vikings are 21-32 all-time in playoffs with 0 Super Bowl victories, the definition of choke artists. The Buffalo Bills went to 4 consecutive Super Bowls from 1990 to 1993 and lost all 4. They're the only team in NFL history to lose 4 straight championship games. The Bills lost their first Super Bowl to the Giants 2019 when Scott Norwood missed a 47-yard field goal wide right. They would then lose to Washington 37-24, then Dallas back-to-back years 52-17 and 30-13. The Bills have also suffered recent playoff collapses, including the 13-second collapse against Kansas City in the 2021 divisional round when they allowed the Chiefs to tie the game with just 13 seconds left in regulation. Buffalo would lose in OT after that. They would then go on to lose again to the Chiefs in 2023 when favored, and in 2024. The Chargers have perfected the art of choking. The 2022 wildcard collapse when they blew a 27-0 lead to Jacksonville and lost 31-30 is the 3rd largest blown lead in playoff history. San Diego's playoff history is filled with similar collapses. The team went 14-2 in 2006 and lost at home to New England in the divisional round. They went 13-3 in 2009 and lost at home to the Jets in the divisional round. The Chargers have made the playoffs 19 times and won just 1 AFC Championship game in 1994. They have a .500 playoff winning percentage with just 1 conference title in 30 plus years. Kyle Shanahan has blown 2 10-point fourth quarter leads in the Super Bowl as a head coach. The 49ers led 20-10 with 7:13 left in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs and would ultimately lose 31-20 in 2019. San Francisco would then play the Chiefs again in 2023, holding a lead in the fourth quarter but would ultimately lose in OT because they didn't know the rules. Shanahan's other defining moment came as Atlanta's offensive coordinator when they blew that 28-3 Super Bowl lead. And the rest is history. Lastly, we have Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning won 2 Super Bowls, but his playoff resume is filled with failures. Manning went one and done 9 times in 14 playoff appearances with Indianapolis. His playoff passer rating of 87.4 is significantly lower than his regular season rating of 96.5. Manning threw 40 touchdowns and 25 interceptions in 27 playoff games. In his 2 Super Bowl victories, Manning threw 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions combined. In the first Super Bowl, he had a passer rating of 81.8 and a 29-17 win over Chicago. In Super Bowl 50, he threw 0 touchdowns and 1 interception with a passer rating of 56.6 and a 24-10 win over Carolina. Denver's defense won that championship, not Manning. His worst playoff stretch came from 2000 to 2003 when Indianapolis went one and done multiple times in consecutive years, despite having home field advantage. He would then choke to the Patriots in 2004 off a historic MVP season. Manning's playoff failures are a little bit overshadowed by his 2 Super Bowl rings, but not really. And so there you have it, the 7 levels of NFL playoff chokers. Subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.